Well, welcome along to Snetterton, everybody, or welcome back if you joined us earlier on for our sprint race. But round 22 of the GT Cup Championship, the pit stop race, is coming up very shortly. If you were with us earlier on, you'd have noticed that we are around what is a soggy Snetterton 300 circuit. So the full Snetterton configuration, taking in all of that new infield section that was built the best part of 10 years ago now, can you believe, since they transformed this fantastic venue. The weather has closed in. We did say earlier on the weather forecast was due to get even worse in this part of East Anglia, and absolutely that is what has happened. The heavens opened for our sprint race earlier on, and it has been raining heavily ever since. So it's entirely different conditions, even worse, that greet the drivers when they will head out onto circuit very shortly for their pit stop race. One of our support races just coming to a conclusion here. I said we had a sprint race earlier on in changeable conditions, so let's catch up with some of the drivers from that sprint race. But before that, let's look back at the highlights. As the lights go out, they accelerate their way up towards Richie's corner for the first time. Richard Neary has the inside line. Steve Burgess, though, on the less polished surface. The outer line might work here in the wet conditions. Let's hope that everybody treads gingerly through the first couple of corners, because it's a very full grid. So Group GTB leading Porsche, Group GTA leading Ginetta, Group GTH, I think that will be leading McLaren over the start-finish line, as Josh Jackson propels himself past the Make It Happen Racing Chris Hart-driven Ginetta. The GT4 McLaren with a bit more grunt in the straight line. And off, that is the Group GTH leader that is off. Steve Burgess goes through at the wheel of the Radical, picks up the place going in towards Richie's corner, but I think ran a little bit wide. Yeah, so straight back through goes John Dillon into what will be the lead of the race by the look of things, because Richard Neary must have made a mistake on that lap in the middle sector. I think the Mercedes has had an off, so this is now for the lead of the race. Yep, that's the Mercedes behind in 5th place. So Richard Neary did have an off somewhere, and that has dropped him down into 5th position. And that is Warren Gilbert is off. We've not seen a single mistake from Warren all season hardly, so a spin at the wheel of the car that was leading, Group GTC, just going to show how tricky the conditions are now getting out there. Oh, and there's an off. That's Fraser Smart, who had taken over the lead of Group GTC at the wheel of the Lamborghini. That's going to put Warren Gilbert, who had the spin a couple of laps ago, back through. Through goes Warren Gilbert. So shortly lived lead in Group GTC for Fraser Smart. The fight we're looking at here is Richard Chamberlain, who has still got bottled up behind him the newer Porsche of Seamus Jennings. This is for 6th and for 7th position. This is James Guest now trying to get the overlap on Mike Price at the wheel of the Balfe Motorsport prepared McLaren, whilst Lauren Demise is trying to weave his way through the order. There's also a spin and a recovering car as well. That's the Fox Motorsport car. Sitting sideways in the middle of the circuit on the exit of Palmer is James Gass, who's had a spin at the wheel of the Feathers Motorsport Aston Martin. Oh, and as he tries to rejoin the circuit, he takes out Cole Cavers, I'm afraid. Cole Cavers then has a spin directly in front of Ed Borodin. Everybody having problems in these tricky conditions here. And off has gone John Dillon, who was the race leader. So no matter where we look, cars are having problems. This is potentially the final lap of the race for John Dillon. There's Ed Borodin trying to reverse the car out of the way. Steve Burgess, through all of this in the Radical, has gone through now to take up the lead of the race, but is still under pressure from Morgan Tilbrook at the wheel of the GT3 McLaren. You don't know where to look because there's so many squabbles going on, and cars making mistakes and drivers making mistakes in these tricky conditions. And Morgan Tilbrook now is trying to side his way up the inside of the Radical. Couldn't quite do it as they went through Oggies. He will still win Group GT3 even if he sits behind the Radical, which is moving around like crazy as it heads through Core. And Morgan Tilbrook is very decisive, dives up the inside heading in towards the final corner. Can he get the car stopped in time? Steve Burgess is going to get the overlap, and with a bit more power the Radical on the run to the line should grab the win as they head up towards the start finish line. It looks as though it's going to be a win for Steve Burgess. The extra power just telling us they came out of Murray. Steve Burgess comes through to claim the win. Morgan Tilbrook in 2nd place, but will pick up top honours in Group GT3. That was a great fight between those two, but a win in Group GTB, and that does now mean that Nick Phelps is the Group GTB champion, subject to official confirmation, of course. Steve, congratulations, 2nd overall win, but that looked tricky.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Unfortunately, my power steering failed on the 2nd green lap flag. So as we started the race, I didn't know how hard the steering was going to be or what it was going to be like, and it was brutal. You know, every time the car slid, I was trying to correct it, and it was a proper workout.
You were trying to keep Morgan behind. You were battling with John Dillon in the early stages, but he had an off too.
Yeah, luckily he went off a couple laps before the end, but yeah, Morgan was behind me and he was putting his nose in everywhere. So luckily I had a few extra brake calls down the straight to keep him behind.
Well done, congratulations. Well, that's second overall win in 2 meetings now.
Yeah, hopefully a couple more to come.
Morgan, that race looked to have a little bit of everything in there. The changing conditions really made it difficult.
It did. It was a very tough race, but a clean race. I was really pleased with the space that we allowed each other, which made it probably entertaining to watch, but also come back in one piece, which was good. So we've got 3 more races this weekend.
You're fighting away with the Radical, the Group GTO, Steve Burgess Radical. It just seemed as though you had the better car through the twiddly parts and he just had the grunt on the straights.
Yeah, there's no question. The Radical had a lot more grunt on the straights. But it is what it is. He won it fair and square. He drove well. I'm sure I got more electrics on my car too, so he earned the win. There's no question about that.
He claimed the win, but you claimed the Group GT3 win.
I did. I beat Richard Neary. That's what matters.
Mo, back on the top step of the podium in Group GTH.
That's right. Yeah, we had a great race. The team did a really good job getting the car ready in time. It was an absolute dream to drive. We had a good race out there. It was tough. I had a bit of a rubbish start, but made up some places, and then fortunately and unfortunately for the orange car, we managed to just get them, as I think there was an issue with their car, and it was just a case of keeping the laps going and bring it to the finish, which we managed to do.
As you say, they had misfortune, but you've had some of that this year, so it's nice to get those wins under your belt.
Yeah, we've really bounced back this weekend. We did everything we could last weekend. It just didn't necessarily fall our way, and the boys have done a great job getting the car looking as good as new again this weekend after it's had some interesting racing at Donington, but no, really good job, and it's been a great season, so it's a nice way to finish off.
So a great start to our championship finals meeting here at Snetterton, and great to catch up with some of the drivers. 4 different race leaders over the course of that 25-minute sprint race. So amazing stuff, and so many twists and turns and dynamics to play out as well. It's going to be similar, I suspect, in this one as well, because not only is it a longer race, it is a 50-minute sprint race. We also have those mandatory pit stops as well that need to take place, meaning that the pro drivers can only jump in for part 2 of the race. The pit window is split between the different groups, so the likes of Group 1, which is Group GTO, Group GT3, Group GTC, will pit earlier than the cars that are in the likes of Group GTB, Group GTH and Group GTA. And also, we have success seconds to consider as well, so depending on how you got on at the previous race meeting, or whether you are a new entrant into the series and the championship for this weekend, that will dictate as to how many extra seconds you spend stationary in the pit stops over the course of the pit stop window. So many different dynamics to play out, and we'll have to wait and see as to who might come out on top in round 22 of the championship season. So the cars are nudging their way out of the pit lane. You can see that already the first few officials are just making their way onto the grid. There is the fantastic looking Porsche 935 of Richard Chamberlain, a car which has been slightly troublesome for him this year. He had problems here at Snetterton at the beginning of the season. That put them out for the whole of the rest of that weekend. He didn't then reappear for another couple of rounds. He was back out last time out at Donington Park, but a brake issue in one of the races curtailed his weekend. He did say to me earlier on they could have fixed that brake issue, but it would have been not doing it properly. They really needed the car back to the workshop to do it properly, and on the basis of it was a total brake failure in the car, they didn't want to mess around. They thought the safest thing is to bring the car back to Snetterton and just have to put up with some non-starts at Donington Park to make sure that they returned. And it went really, really well. Ideally, not the conditions for that car, probably the most powerful car we've got in the field. It's at the front of the queue to go out, so they will all, of course, be on their controlled Pirelli wet tyres that they can run. They are limited to the amount of slick tyres they can use over the weekend, but not many cars, if any, opted for slicks in race number 1. Nobody will be opting for it in race number 2, so it does mean that they all head out there on their wet tyres, which aren't controlled in reality, so they all have to run the same Pirelli wet tyre, but you're not limited for the amount of sets that you can run when it comes to wet tyres. So they'll thread their way out there onto the grid. We saw earlier on, as you heard in the highlights, that Nick Phelps had secured the Group GTB championship title. However, the overall championship title is still up for grabs. That cannot be decided in this race. That will be decided tomorrow, either in the sprint race or in the second race, the pit stop race tomorrow, as to who will be the overall champion for this year. And another championship which still hasn't been decided yet as to where the Group GTO title is going. Is it going to go the way of the race one winner, Steve Burgess? Can he overhaul the points deficit between himself and Paul Bailey and Ross Wiley, who share their McLaren Can-Am over the course of this weekend? So that is still to be decided. And again, that cannot be decided, such are the mathematics in this race. That will be decided either again in the sprint race tomorrow or the pit stop race, subject to how things unfold over the course of this race. So the cars making their way out onto a rather soggy Snetterton circuit. The one good thing, I suppose, ever looking for positives out of negatives, is that for race number 1, it was dry and then just started spitting and then became wet. So it meant that the circuit did transition, but went through that phase where it was neither wet nor dry. It's just that horrible middle part, greasy, horrible, not nice. As a racing driver, the most difficult conditions to drive in. You either want it dry or you want it wet. In between, it's just not nice. Whereas we've now have transitioned to full wet. So at least the drivers will have consistent conditions throughout the course of this race. And we'll be taking those subtly different lines again in this 50-minute pit stop race. We'll get all the cars lined up on the grid. I'll wander you through the grid as and when we head off onto their formation lap, but you can see that the rain is very much, I think, in for the afternoon here in this part of Norfolk. It might be the driest county. Not today, it's not. But it is going to forecast. The McLaren Can-Am is out. We saw Paul Bailey, if you're watching the live stream earlier on, have a small spin, and I thought briefly he might have made a tiny bit of contact with the barriers at the back of the McLaren, but I think he just got away with that by the skin of his teeth. So nice to see the McLaren is back out there. But there were a couple of cars that had problems in race number 1 we won't see out this time through. So the likes of the number 32 Alex Malakim Redline Racing Porsche, the Cayman GT4, is not out. Some sort of mechanical woe for that car. And also we saw on the highlights there the Feathers Motorsport Aston Martin sideways in the circuit trying to recover. The onboard footage was looked at, I gather, by the officials, and because, of course, you have wraparound seats in cars nowadays, James Guest just had no idea. He thought there was a gap in the traffic because he'd seen a pack of cars come through, nudged it forward and made that contact with Carl Gavers, and that number 82 Aston Martin is too badly damaged, we gather, to take part in this race. But other than that, we are expecting a full grid of 32 cars, for which some are already finding the limits in these conditions. A spin there for James Townsend, who is scheduled to start the number 118 Fox Motorsport Ginetta. So he slithers his way back off the wet tarmac, over the curbs, onto the grass, and then gets the car pointing in the right direction. So even at these reduced speeds of an outlap in reality, some of the cars still managing to find just how little grip there is out there. And for many of these drivers, it will be a case of playing with the traction control and ABS settings on the car to try and make sure that you are happy with what the car is doing underneath you. So there'll be a chunk of that going on, I'm sure, on the formation lap for this one, powering your foot down through the floor and just seeing what the traction control does. And do you want it either more traction control kicking in, or do you want less traction kicking in and diving on the brakes and adjusting your either ABS settings or the brake bias settings on the car as well. So up onto the outside of the front row of the grid. This grid is set based on the fastest lap times set in the sprint race earlier on, and therefore it is that car, Steve Burgess, that lines up on the outside of the front row of the grid. He might have taken the race win, but he didn't set the fastest lap of the race. He set the second fastest lap of the race, and it was Morgan Tilbrook at the wheel of the number 66 Enduro Motorsport McLaren GT3 that set the fastest lap of the race. So that McLaren 750S GT3 setting the fastest lap of the race. This car here set the third fastest lap of the race in the hands of Richard Neary. Richard is scheduled to start this race as well, so he's just getting the car pushed back into position. Oh, what could have been? It could have been a win for Richard. He was leading the race and had about a 2-second gap, but lost 13 seconds in the middle sector. I don't think we saw it on the stream, but clearly something happened with the car where he slithered off in the middle part of the lap, and that was what lost him the lead. But he wasn't the only car to have slithered off having lost the lead, because John Dillon did that later on, which allowed Steve Burgess to go through and take up the lead. And of course Steve Burgess was overtaken by Morgan Tilbrook on the approach to the final corner, and it was the only extra, the grunt of the Radical, that meant that this particular car here didn't claim a win earlier on today. It was the charge to the line where the Radical had more grunt than the GT3 McLaren had got. So despite setting the fastest lap of the race, Morgan Tilbrook, and therefore setting pole position for this race, the overall win eluded them. But it was a win in the group, more importantly. Group GT3 for the cars. So onto pole position comes that car. We will, I think, get all of the cars into position. Looks like Graham Tilley's Nissan in the middle of your screen is just coming into position now on what is scheduled to be the 5th row of the grid. Graham, having repaired the car after an incident at Donington Park, partnered up with Senan Fielding again for this weekend. He's had a mixture of Wildred Gertha and Senan Fielding as the professional driver sharing the car with him throughout the course of the 2021 championship season. Will, I think, otherwise engaged this weekend, so the very good super sub Senan Fielding jumps on board. 1 minute board already being held aloft, so all of the final officials will need to clear the grid very quickly because we're about to get the rolling lap underway here at Snetterton for what is, remember, our championship finals race meeting. We started the season at Donington Park on the 10th and 11th of April. Then it was down to Brands Hatch for just 2 rounds over the course of just Saturday the 1st of May on the Grand Prix circuit there. Then it was here at Snetterton for rounds 7, 8, 9 and 10 of the championship in the early part of June, the 5th and 6th of June. Substantively different weather conditions in June to we've got today. On to Alton Park for just 2 races on the 3rd of July, and then from there it was Silverstone on the Grand Prix circuit in the middle of August, Donington Park just a couple of weekends ago, the 18th and 19th of September, and the final 4 rounds of the championship taking place here at Snetterton in what is the 2nd and 3rd of October. The calendar for next year has already been announced as well. Follows a very similar format in terms of the circuits we visit and the kind of times of year as well for the 2022 championship season as it will be. So off goes the safety car. John Dillon starting from the pit lane by the look of things, so that is going to be a gap on the 2nd row of the grid. So as the cars head off on their formation lap, that's then guide you through the way that they line up and give you the starting drivers. Pole position goes the way of Morgan Tilbrook, and alongside will be Steve Burgess. Both of those cars have 20 seconds extra in the pit lane. Row 2 of the grid is Richard Neary with 15 seconds, and John Dillon, who will start from the pit lane, will have an extra 20 seconds. Row 3 of the grid is Matt Manderson, and alongside is Seamus Jennings, who's got an extra 15 seconds in the pit lane. And row 4 is Richard Chamberlain and the Ferrari of Laurent Demise, who will have an extra 10 seconds. Row 5 of the grid, Graham Tilley, and number 9, Warren Gilbert, who's got an extra 20 seconds to spend in the pit lane. And row 6 of the grid is James Simons and Tom Rawlings, who will start, and he's got an extra 15 seconds in the pit lane. Row 7 of the grid, Josh Jackson, an extra 10 seconds, alongside his number 35, Nick Phelps in the Porsche, who's got an extra 20. And then the next row of the grid is going to be the number 212 Ginetta. Chris Hart will start, and alongside will be number 44, which is Steve Rushton. Row 9 of the grid, 67, Simon Orange, who's got an extra 20 seconds in the pit lane, alongside number 56, Roy Millington, who's got an extra 10. Row 10 of the grid is going to be the Valve Motorsport number 90 McLaren in the hands of Mike Price, and alongside is the Greystone GT3 car, the McLaren of Andre Borodin, an extra 10 seconds in the pit lane. Row 11 of the grid, 777, started by Ron Johnson, because that's a new entrant to the championship this weekend. They pick up 20 seconds, and alongside is number 50, which is Carl Cavers. Row 12 of the grid, car number 15, Century Motorsports David Holloway, lines up alongside the number 77 Greystone McLaren of Mark Hopton. Row 13 of the grid, it's another Greystone McLaren, that is going to be Richard Mason, who has got for company number 28, which is Paul Bailey, and the McLaren who's got an extra 20 seconds. Row 14 is Fox Motorsports. James Townsend will start, and alongside his 96 Chris Kemp, who's got 10 seconds. Row 15 is going to be the car of Patrick Collins that we saw heading out onto the grid quite late on, alongside number 3, which is Charlotte Gilbert, who's got an extra 15 seconds. And the final row of the grid, number 72, Michael Coker, who I think goes solo in this one, alongside Alex Stevenson, who will start, and that car has an extra 15 seconds to spend in the pit lane. If you're wondering how the seconds are accumulated, it's 60 seconds as a standard pit stop, plus the time to go into the pit lane and out of the pit lane at the regulatory speed limit. So every car has to be stationary for 60 seconds. But if you win your group in the previous pit stop race, you pick up an extra 20 seconds. If you are second in your group, you pick up an extra 15. If you are third in your group, you pick up an extra 10 seconds. So that's for each group that we've got, so all of the 6 groups. And then, of course, in the likes of car number 777, which is Ron Johnson, partnered up with British touring car star Tom Ingram, because they're a new entrant to the championship. They, for this weekend, will pick up in their group an additional 20 seconds is the way it works. So already you can see, even at this reduced speed, the amount of spray that's being deposited out of the very efficient Pirelli tyres that are trying to remove the water from the surface. There's no chance of the circuit drying out because it's still absolutely bucketing it down here at Snetterton, but the cars will look to try and see where they can all get comfortably through the first couple of corners. First corner, Ritchie's, always gets a bit tight. Second corner is a hairpin, which is the Wilson hairpin. So that's the one where cars, again, and drivers just need to be conscious of making sure they hit their braking points. Don't brake too early and catch the car out behind. Don't brake too late and end up going into the car in front of you. So they'll just be conscious over the course of the first lap. They've already raced in the wet conditions, so it's just a single formation lap for them this time through. And it is Morgan Tilbrook and Steve Burgess that line up there on the front row of the grid. Round 22 of the 2021 GT Cup Championship is go here at Snetterton. Enormous ball of spray that everybody is having to peer their way through, and it's only Morgan Tilbrook and Steve Burgess that have got the clear windscreens at the moment. Morgan Tilbrook's got the inside line. Steve Burgess now with power steering at the wheel of the Radical. What can he do around the outside line? And it looks as though they're still going to be side by side. Oh, Burgess on the grass a little bit as he gets the Radical back off the grass. Through has gone Richard Neary. So Morgan Tilbrook leads, Richard Neary second. Only now just John Dillon get going from the pit lane area. So that car has got huge amounts to try and make up for John Dillon and Sandy Mitchell, reigning British GT champion, who he's partnered up with for this weekend in the Scott Sport Lamborghini. So Burgess sliding his way around through Palmer. He has got the car of Seamus Jennings, the GCAT Racing Porsche, sitting directly behind him. I think everybody's being very sensible in the first couple of corners just to make sure that they work their way through the traffic. A little bit of contact there maybe as Matt Manderson just got the Aston Martin up the inside of the Radical, but it was just a light touch between the pair of them. Both of them should be able to continue without any problems with that one. But everybody, yeah, I think has just done the right thing, approached this race with caution, let the race settle down a bit and then push on. There is Michael Coker at the wheel of the slightly older Aston Martin. I think he's going solo in this race and looking for the lead of the race, and diving up the inside goes Richard Neary. So championship leading Team ABBA Racing Mercedes through and ahead of Morgan Tilbrook's McLaren. So Mercedes leads McLaren. Now, Richard Neary made that small mistake in the greasy conditions earlier on in what are now full wet conditions. As I say, at least it's going to remain consistent probably for the race, and Richard Neary has taken no second opportunity needed, straight through, picks up the lead of the race and will look to try and now get a bit of daylight between himself and Morgan Tilbrook. But running wide and onto the wet curves like that, Richard Neary, is not going to be what you want to be doing in these conditions. And John Dillon, who started from the pit lane, has had a spin by the look of things. Now, where is that? Is that Palmer? I think that might be the approach to Palmer, where he's had a spin. The car is stricken 45 degrees to the soup. No, it's coming out of Oggies. He's gotten the power too early, and the tail end of the car has come round. He's pointing in the wrong direction, and at the moment, going nowhere, I'm afraid. I was about to say Seamus Jennings is now up into third place. Fourth place is the Radical of Steve Burgess. And fifth place at the moment is splashing its way out of Murray's, which is the Aston Martin of Matt Manderson, coming under pressure from Richard Chamberlain's Porsche. You could see, that was a fantastic side shot you could see there of the spray hitting the front of the Porsche and the aerodynamics pushing the water over the windscreen and out the back. Wonderful split-second shot that you saw there. Richard Chamberlain, is he going to get through and ahead? No, he's not, but the safety car is coming out, I think. Yeah, safety car is coming out onto track. Off has gone Carl Cavers at the wheel of the number 50 Veluga Racing Porsche. But yeah, the safety car is coming out onto circuit, and one can only imagine that is because of the stricken Lamborghini of John Dillon on the exit of Oggies. Now, for John Dillon and Sandy Mitchell, that is not at all what they want. So early on in the race, the car already having to start from the pit lane does make you wonder whether maybe it started from the pit lane because it maybe had some sort of either gearbox issue or starter motor issue, and the spin was either caused by that gearbox issue or as a result of the starter motor issue or the gearbox issue. He can't get it going again, so it's there. You can see brake lights are coming on and off, but John Dillon, who is hugely experienced, would get that car out of harm's way if he could, and clearly the car is just not having it, so it looks as though it's going to be quite literally an early bath for John Dillon, which is an enormous shame for a driver who has been right up there at the sharp end. He's on his third different pro driver for this season, actually. Phil Quaver's done the vast majority of the driving of that car, but Phil Keane came in and did a round with him. Sandy Mitchell for this weekend, but yeah, you can see the cars having to weave their way past John Dillon, who has had the opportunity of a full lap to try and strike that car into life, and if it was going to go, it would have gone by now, and with the position of where it is, it's not even easy for the marshals to get to that car and get it out of harm's way. So sensible thing for the officials to throw the safety car early on. Means that everybody has got the opportunity just to calm things down again. The restart would be single file, of course, which makes things easier as and when we get the race back underway, but it's going to be probably a lap after this before we truly get the race restarted, because the safety car will be waiting for the race leader on the start-finish line. So let's run you through the order then. Let's pick out the early group leaders. A long way to go in the race, but it is Richard Neary that leads the race and leads Group GT3. It's another GT3 car there in second place, Morgan Tilbrook. Seamus Jennings in a GT3 car is third, the number 33 Porsche. Fourth is the Radical. Now that's the leading car in Group GTO. Fifth, it's back to Group GT3, which is number 47, the Aston Martin of Matt Manderson. Then sixth place is that car there, which is the number 5 Porsche of Richard Chamberlain. Seventh place is the Group GTC leading car, which is going to be the number 9 Lamborghini of Warren Gilbert. Eighth place is the red Porsche. That will be leading Group GTB, which is Nick Phelps, who is sharing once again this weekend with Dino Zamparelli. Ninth place is back to Group GT3, which is going to be car number 155, the blue and orange Porsche of Laurent Demise. And completing the top 10 is car number 26. Now, that claimed to win in Group GTH earlier on today in the hands of Mo Ritson. It's Tom Rawlings that starts, and the number 26 Paddock Motorsport McLaren, again, leads the group now in the early stages. John Dillon's car being pushed out of harm's way. The other group leaders that we've got that are outside of the top 10 at the moment is the Group GTA leading car, which is Simon Orange, who at the moment is surely on course to win the Sporting Challenge. Now, the Sporting Challenge is for amateur drivers in reality that enter the pit stop races. And for Simon Orange, he has a very comprehensive lead in the Sporting Challenge Championship. So as long as he finishes this race, I think we can largely say, again, subject to technical checks and official confirmation, that Simon Orange is going to scoop up the Sporting Challenge race, which carries points for each one of the pit stop races. There are no sprint races including in the Sporting Challenge, and the pro drivers can't get involved either in that. So it is purely where there are either amateur drivers driving on their own or two amateur drivers sharing the car together. That creates the Sporting Challenge in reality. So the field under safety car weaving their way round past Agostini. That's the Group GTH leading car of Tom Rawlings, but if he looks in his mirrors, he'll see that Steve Ruston is there. Steve Ruston will look in his mirrors and spot that Josh Jackson isn't far behind. So it's 3 McLarens, 1, 2 and 3, I think, in GTH at the moment, is it? Yes, it is, yeah, 10th, 11th and 12th places overall. Those 3 McLarens are the top 3 in Group GTH, being headed by the number 26 from the 44 from the number 1. So that's a battle that's well worth watching as and when we get the race back underway. Now, John Dillon's car has been pushed from where it came to rest in the circuit, but it's not fully out of harm's way as yet. So I do wonder whether on the wet grass, when the marshals have pushed it there, it now might have beached itself a little bit, or they literally, with their own boots that they're wearing, can't get the traction on the grass to get the car out of the way. So there might be the requirement of a recovery truck to go around and scoop that car up. You can see in the background some flashing lights, which I think might be one of the recovery trucks on the way to the scene to try and get the car out of the way. Now, if that's the case, then there's going to be at least another lap behind the safety car. There's the Group GTO Can-Am McLaren of Paul Bailey, who will be handing the car over to Ross Wiley for part 2 of the race. Ross, a former British GT champion in the GT4 category. Paul Bailey, a former champion in GT Cup in GTC in 2018 and 2016. He secured the Group GTO title in 2015 as well. And whatever the problem was with John Dillon's car, it's going again. So maybe it was just a case of alt control and delete and reset the car again, or maybe a bit of heat soak or something, or maybe some sort of push start or bump start was required. But the one good thing is that if that car is now out of harm's way and the marshals are back on their post, we could go green at the end of this lap by the look of things. What's the safety car doing? Is it peeling its way into the pit lane? Is it going to continue around for a further lap? It's going to continue around for a further lap. So the radio communication just not done in time, and the marshals sufficiently clear so as to allow us to go back to racing this time through. So there'll be one further lap behind the safety car. Now for John Dillon, is he going to bring that car into the pit lane? Or is he going to continue around and see whether the officials might let him continue in the race? Either way, he has lost a lap or 2, hasn't he? So everybody else is now on lap number 4. John Dillon has yet to even complete lap number 1. So he's 3 laps off the lead. That will put him something like 8th in the group. But John Dillon is in for the full season and is scoring championship points. Other cars this weekend are running as invitationals in GT3 and therefore wouldn't accumulate championship points. They'd be invisible in reality. So John could potentially finish 8th in the group. He could pick up the points for, let's say, 6th or 5th or maybe even 4th in the group, depending on how many invitational cars finish ahead of him, because they are not eligible for points. So safety car out there. We are on lap number 4. We've got 40 minutes of the race to go. The first of the pit stop window opens with 26 minutes of the race remaining, so it's another 14 minutes yet before we'll see any cars dive for the pit lane. And as it's the Saturday pit stop race, Group 1 pit first, which is the cars at the sharp end of the order really, so those in Group GTO, Group GT3 and Group GTC, which would in reality mean the top 7 cars would all be pitting in the first batch, together with the car in 9th place, and the likes of John Dillon as well, who slipped to the tail end of the order. And the Group 2 cars, so those in GTB, GTH and GTA, their pit window opens with 21 minutes to go, so it's 26 minutes to 21 minutes remaining for Group 1 to pit, between 21 and 15 remaining for Group 2 to pit. And during that period of time, everybody has to come into the pit lane, everybody has to serve a minimum period of being stationary for 60 seconds, plus any success seconds that you are allocated, and you have to drive down the pit lane, both on the way entering the pit lane and on the exit, at the pit lane speed limit. Now, nobody's stood there with a stopwatch checking that you're stationary for 60 seconds. That's not the way it works. There's a beam on the way into the pit lane, there's a beam on the way out of the pit lane. They know how long the pit lane is, they know how long it takes to drive down the pit lane at the regulatory speed limit, which will be 50 kilometres an hour, I would imagine, for this weekend. And they add that time of driving down the pit lane at the speed limit to the time you have to be stationary. And if you are under, then you've done one or two things. You've either not remained stationary for the correct amount of time, or you've sped in the pit lane. Either one of those two. And that's the simple calculation, really. And that's the way that it works, not just for this championship, but for many championships which have this minimum pit stop period, whether it be a stationary period timed or timed pit in to pit out, as some are. Now, the lights are out on the safety car, which means we are going to go back to green flag racing this next time through, so it's up to Richard Neary as to when he wants to get things underway. Now, for Richard Neary, an extra 15 seconds to spend in the pit lane relative to the car that sits behind him on the road, which is Morgan Tilbrook, who's got an extra 20 to spend in the pit lane. So as long as Richard Neary is ahead of Morgan Tilbrook, then that still puts him in a strong position once we've cycled through the pit stops. But there are other cars out there in the group that haven't got any time penalties at all to worry about. Looks as though the Seamus Jennings GCAT Racing Porsche has still just about managed to hang on to 3rd position, despite the extra grunt of the Radical RXC of Steve Burgess in a straight line. The number 7 car still sitting there in 4th place last time we picked up on it. John Dillon is indeed limping his way into the pit lane, so clearly either issues with the Lamborghini or because of receiving outside assistance, he's been told that he's not able to continue in the race. Such a shame for John Dillon and for Sandy Mitchell, really, who is partnered with him making his debut in the GT Cup Championship this weekend, the reigning British GT champion. Sandy Mitchell, unfortunately, isn't going to get the chance to drive today. So leaders through Agostini. Seamus Jennings in 3rd place. Matt Manderson comes diving up the inside of the Radical. A bit of bodywork or a wing mirror casing flies off for either Radical or Aston Martin. I think it might have been Radical that was just that little bit of contact between the pair of them. There's another bit of bodywork flies off on the exit of Agostini, but Steve Burgess is still sticking his elbows out and having none of it. So Radical still just ahead of the charging Aston Martin. Now, Steve could let that car go because he leads Group GTO in what is 4th position overall. Richard Chamberlain is the 2nd car in Group GTO, and Richard Chamberlain is at the moment just behind that Aston Martin that's trying to work his way through. So I think that's why Steve Burgess is so keen to try and hang on to the place. So John Dillon's car being pushed back into the garage. Down the straight, has the Radical got the legs on the GT3 Aston Martin? One would have thought so. And so it's still Radical from Aston Martin from Porsche for 4th, 5th and 6th positions. And I think that probably means we've got 6 different manufacturers inside the top 6 again at the moment. Big sideways moment for Warren Gilbert, who slides across the nose of Nick Phelps's Porsche. There's a light touch between the two of them. That delays Laurent Demise at the wheel of his Ferrari, who has to get off the gas, and that has allowed the Group GTH leading McLaren to go through now, I think, which was Josh Jackson who gained through all of that, I think. So there's been a bit of a shuffle that time through. So there goes Nick Phelps. There's Warren Gilbert. Yeah, and there is number 1, which is Josh Jackson. That car leads Group GTH at the moment and is diving up the inside of the Group GTC leading Lamborghini, which, in a straight line, should have the extra power, that Lamborghini, and should be able to power its way straight past the GT4 McLaren that he's lost the place to. New fastest lap of the race to Richard Neary, the race leader, 2 minutes 16.867. 2:16.867. Well, it was damp and greasy earlier on. We managed a 2-minute 9.9, so again going to show how much the conditions have deteriorated even more this time through. We haven't had a full flying lap in yet, really, have we, because of the safety car period, and even that was not a true flying lap, because again it was just as the safety car peeled its way in. Now Warren Gilbert under pressure from the number 212 car, which for this race is Chris Hart that's starting again. Chris Hart has got the number 44 McLaren of Steve Ruston right behind. So Steve Ruston looking to try and hang on to the position that he's in. Is another 2 McLarens in Group GTH queuing up behind him, one of which is Tom Rawlings, the next of which will be the white and the light green car, the Balfe Motorsport machine of Mike Price. Tom Rawlings up the inside of Steve Ruston. Can he make it through in the background? Lamborghini and Ginetta stay in the same order, but the 2 McLarens that were side by side on the way into the corner are still side by side on the way out. And I don't think that Tom Rawlings made it there, no. So despite his very best endeavours, Tom's still bottled up behind the signature RV machine, and those 2 cars are both being run out of the same stable, that being Paddock Motorsport. So Tom Rawlings this time, Oggies, again looks to try and sneak his way through. Is he going to make it on the run in towards Williams? They're still side by side as they get towards Williams. He's fully alongside, he's through, he's in front. Place gain for Tom Rawlings, place lost for Steve Ruston. So the 2 teammates swap the order, but quicker coming out of the corner now is Steve Ruston, so he gets a bit more momentum down the Bentley Straight. He pulls to the left-hand side of the circuit, which gives him the inside line when they get down towards this left-hand flick at Brundle, and then they'll flick right at Nelson. And has he made it back through again, Steve Ruston? No, not quite. So Tom Rawlings hangs on to the place, and Steve Ruston might lose a further place here as Simon Orange squeezes his way through at the wheel of the Ginetta, but then runs up onto the curbs on the exit of the corner, and I think will instantly give the place back again. Will he? No, he's still trying to brave it out around the outside at the bomb hole. The extra grip on the outside line might work for him here. However, it looks as though the safety car, I'm afraid to say, is coming back out again. So just as we got things back underway, we've had something else occur out on circuit. Someone else have some sort of issue or mechanical woe, and that is going to bring about a further safety car period. Now, quite what it is, there's no information just as yet as to whom it might be. So I'll have to wait and see whether we can spot anything around the very edges of the circuit. Now, there's still another, what, 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes to go before the pit window opens, so I'm more than hopeful that we should be able to get this safety car period done and dusted and out of harm's way and the car recovered before the pit window opens, because if we don't, then we are potentially going to have the pit window open whilst the safety car is out there, and unfortunately the safety car hasn't come out in front of the race leader. It's come out right in front of the car that was running third in the race, which is going to be Seamus Jennings. So the leading pair have got through and ahead of the safety car, Richard Neary and Morgan Tilbrook. So that now in theory means that every other car behind the safety car is going to have to be waved through. That will only happen as and when the incident has been cleared. So first thing we need to do is clear the incident, then we'll have the waving by of cars, and then all of those cars that are waved by then have to catch back up with the train again. So that is going to slightly extend the safety car period, and Richard Neary and Morgan Tilbrook I think they're slowing up to allow the safety car to pass them, which would be a very unusual thing to do, but I've got to say it's a more efficient way of achieving what we need to achieve, which is the safety car ahead of the race leader. So if that's the case, that is very sensible driving by Richard Neary and Morgan Tilbrook, because now it means that those 2 cars would have had to have driven all the way round to catch to the back of the train. The safety car would have had to wave everybody by, and then all of those would have had to go round to catch the back of the train. So that is really, really good driving, intelligent driving, and to be fair, I'm not entirely sure I've ever seen that before. So if that's the case, yeah, let's get the incident cleared, and once the incident's cleared, we're good to go straight away, which means that we can crack on with the remaining 31 minutes of this race, there or thereabouts. And as for the whereabouts of any cars that have gone missing, not entirely sure. I wonder if it might be weather conditions that perhaps have deteriorated to a degree that the clerk of the course has opted to put out the safety car, because I can't at the moment see any other cars that are not circulating. We know of the whereabouts of John Dillon's car, and Charlotte Gilbert has just gone through Sector 2 as the last car, so it can only be weather conditions. Yeah, every other car is circulating still at the moment, so I think the clerk of the course in these worsening conditions has taken the decision to deploy the safety car for a period of time to see whether the conditions improve. It's such a tough decision for the officials to make, because of course if the cars are circulating at racing speeds, they are more likely in these conditions to aquaplane or make mistakes or have an incident, and that's not what you want. But the problem is, if you deploy the safety car, the cars are circulating slower, and therefore the water doesn't clear as much, and with the rain still coming down, the track arguably could get wetter. So there are no winners out of this situation. The clerk of the course will only do it if he thinks that it's compromising safety, and that is always at the forefront of everybody's mind. You know, we've got to keep the drivers safe. We have to keep the marshals and the officials safe as well. You know, what we don't want are cars aquaplaning and heading off the circuit, because we could end up with not only damaged cars but damaged people, and neither of those is good. I did spot there also that there was one car circulating without its lights on, which you would like to think would be picked up on as well. That was the number 17, Orange Racing, powered by JMH Ginetta of Patrick Collins, who I think certainly had no front lights on, no headlights on. It's whether he perhaps has lost his tail lights as well. So yeah, headlamps on and everybody else, but yeah, watch out, there's one car you'll see, no headlamps, and therefore you'd like to think that that driver would be informed by the officials that he needs to do it. So safety car continuing round. In terms of the overall championship, well, it will still be the car that leads this race, albeit under safety car, the number 88 car of Sam and Richard Neary, who will be leading the championship overall. As for the car that's second in the championship overall, that will be the car that's currently running in 10th position, but leading its group. So both of the cars at the sharp end of the overall championship. It's the points you accumulate in your respective group that are important. So that car there, number 88 Mercedes, leads the championship and runs in Group GT3. The car that is second in the championship and also in with a shout to claim the overall title is currently in 10th position, and that's the number 9 Lamborghini of Warren Gilbert, who, let's say, has been a group champion in the GT Cup in the past and has been a stalwart of this series, really. His Top Cats racing team running the Marcos Mantis cars for many years. We've seen them out at Warren Gilbert with Neil Huggins, securing some good victories in their Lamborghini Gallardo a few seasons ago. Moving over to this new car that Jensen Lund bought, the Lamborghini Super Trofeo for this year. First time in the car, really, for Warren and for Jensen at the beginning of the season, but they've been so consistent with it. Jensen, the man from the New Forest, who was still on crutches today when I saw him briefly in the paddock, had a significant operation just a couple of weekends ago, and was in hospital for the week, wasn't able to race at Donington Park, still certainly not in a position to be able to race this weekend. I think medical advice was don't travel. Warren wants to be here. There, you just saw the Ginetta in the background again. Yeah, definitely no lights on that Ginetta. So yeah, we continue to wish Jensen well with his recovery. Now, where is that Ginetta? There's another one there with no headlamps on, so that is Simon Orange's, but there's another car behind that didn't have headlamps on as well, so you would imagine the drivers ought to be... Now, it's got rear visibility, high visibility light on, but you'd have thought they ought to have their headlamps on in this reduced visibility, so he's not the only one. So no lights on at the front. Yeah, lots of lights on at the back, so at least if you're behind it, you can at least see something through the spray. But there was another one of it, and it's another car, it's another Ginetta from the same team, actually, that also hasn't got its headlights on. But the only two I've picked up on, Roy Millington's has got one rear light not working. There's the other Ginetta, yeah, it's got rear lights on, no front lights on it. So I'll have to wait and see. So safety car still out there. Now the pit window will be opening now, is my looking of the regulations. So I think it's 26 minutes to go for this group. So we potentially could see the cars at the sharp end of the order come in this time. So these are any cars that run in Group GT3 for the GT3 homologated cars, in Group GTO for the open specification cars, and in Group GTC for the newer cars. There's a number 17 car, yeah, and sister car to the other one I was picking up on. No headlamps on either of them. So the Group GTC cars, which are for newer spec challenge cars. So that would mean that, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth place could all come into the pit lane. Nick Phelps, who's there in seventh, couldn't. Into the pit lane has come Paul Bailey at the wheel of the McLaren Can-Am. That is, I think, just before the pit window opened, potentially. Well, depends on when he broke the beam coming into pit lane entry. So Nick Phelps in seventh couldn't come in. Neither could the car in eighth place. But Laurent Demise in ninth could, at the wheel of the 155 Ferrari. That number 4 Nissan could come in, which is Graham Tilley. That runs in Group GT3, but is way down in 16th position at the moment, Graham. So I think most of the cars, certainly in the top 15, are likely to come in for those that are eligible, because at the end of the day, the pro drivers can't start the race. Arguably, they're the quicker drivers, so get them in as soon as you possibly can. It gives you a better opportunity. So I think we'll see a raft of them peel their way in. Not that red Porsche, though, or the orange McLaren that sits behind, because the pit window for them will only open in another 5 minutes' time. So for Nick Phelps and for Josh Jackson, they've just got to sit there, wait behind the safety car and see who else peels their way in. But I think we'll see a flurry of activity as the cars come into the pit lane this time through. And subject to what the officials think the weather conditions are doing with regards to improvements, then we might just potentially go green flag racing in another 5 minutes time, maybe. We'll have to wait and see. The difficult thing is that, we're getting to the time of year that when you get a bad day weather-wise, the light level goes even earlier, and we are only 3 weeks away now from the clocks changing, which means that if we were to red flag the race and wait for a gap in the weather and get things going, we wouldn't get through the rest of the programme that's here in reality. So officials, again, have difficult decisions to make. So by doing it under safety car, at least it means that the race still continues. When we get to another 2 support races that are coming up after this, then we still at least have the potential to get through the rest of the programme for the day. Now, Paul Bailey has come into the pit lane at the wheel of the McLaren. I can only assume, because that car was further down through the order, that he came in when the pit window opened. Everybody else is understandably now diving their way into the pit lane. So in comes Richard Neary from the lead of the race. Door opens. Out comes Richard Neary. In goes the seat insert for the slightly smaller Sam Neary, the teenager. Richard Chamberlain brings his Group GTO Porsche into the pit lane. Number 9, Warren Gilbert, who was leading Group GTC, comes in. You can see the Radical on the right of your screen. Steve Burgess is in. So it's a very full and busy pit lane. And yeah, every car at the sharp end is in. So I think that everybody now that was able to come into the pit lane has come in. So I would imagine when we look back at what's going on behind the safety car, I think it'll be the number 35 Porsche of Nick Phelps that will now be behind the safety car. But for Paul Bailey giving way to Ross Wiley, the Scotsman, at the wheel of the number 28 McLaren, that could be a very handy little advantage that they've got there coming into the pit lane whilst it was quieter. So yes, it is Nick Phelps' Porsche that sits behind the safety car at the moment. Now that car will possibly be able to pit at the end of this lap. The pit window for Group 2, which is the cars that run in Group GTB, Group GTH and Group GTA, is due to open in the Saturday pit stop race between the 29th and the 35th minute of the race, which means that is when we get to the point that there's 21 minutes to go. So Sam Neary out of pit road. Morgan Tilbrook held in the pit lane for longer. Remember, those success seconds all start to come into effect there, so that's why the Mercedes got out of the pit lane ahead of the McLaren. And I think, with the pit lane all the way, another third of the way around the lap, I think the pit window will be open for all of these cars going past now at the end of this pit stop. So by splitting the pit windows this year against the various groups that we have, what it does is it prevents something like, as we've got the safety car period, everybody descending onto the pits at the same time. Because we've got split pit windows, the faster cars in reality pit first on the Saturday, the slower cars pit first on the Sunday. It evens it out over the course of the season, but it also means that not everybody arrives in the pit lane at the same time, because you're just not eligible to. One pit window opens, and then as that closes, the next pit window opens for the different cars. So pit window, I think, is now open for all of these cars queuing up behind the safety car. Some of them still weaving to try and, I'm not sure that that's going to build any temperature into the tyres in these conditions. Any temperature you build will soon get cooled off with the amount of water that's sloshing its way around the Snetterton 300 circuit currently. And such a shame that whilst we are 20 minutes away from the checkered flag. We've not seen huge amounts of racing because of the safety car period, because of John Dillon's poor old stricken Lamborghini, and then this safety car period, which was to say, I can only assume, I don't know that for sure, there's been no news from race control, but all of the cars that I could see were circulating still are circulating, so it can only be for weather conditions. And as expected, everybody else that's eligible to pit all dies for the pit lane right at the front of the window. So in comes Nick Phelps, in comes Josh Jackson, in comes Stephen Walton, Tom Rawlings, Chris Hart, Tom Rawlings, Simon Orange, Steve Ruston, Mike Price, David Holloway, Richard Mason, Mark Hopton, all diving for the pit lane. So there is David Holloway's Aston Martin, about to be taken over by former British GT champion Bradley Ellis. Into the pit lane will come Carl Cavers, who is about to hand the number 50 Porsche over to what is going to be Lewis Plato. Number 35, Nick Phelps, clambers out of his car. You see how tall Nick is there. He is not a small chap, Nick Phelps. He is something like 6'8" tall, Nick. Very tall chap. So Charlotte Gilbert, I think, is the only one that has opted not to pit at this stage. You can see, just look at the spray even down the pit lane and the way the water's running down. So Charlotte Gilbert has not pitted at the wheel of the Marcos Mantis. So in reality, Charlotte's the race leader at the moment. So she is the only female we've got on the grid, is Charlotte Gilbert, driving probably one of the most difficult cars on the grid as well. No traction control, no ABS in this car. It's arguably one of the older cars in the field as well, the Marcos Mantis, harking back to the one-make championship that we had for these cars in the UK some years ago. And Charlotte, who is only in her second full season of GT racing, continuing round behind the safety car. Everybody else exiting pit lane. All of the releases from the pit lane are monitored as well and reported if they are unsafe releases. I'd say the one good thing is that we don't have everybody descend to the pit lane in one go. Now that's a stalled car, and that could be important because that was the car that was leading Group GT-A. Now that was Simon Orange, had to stop for an extra 20 seconds compared to others in the group. So Simon Orange is going to have to pick his way through, but it's going to be another full lap before we can start to give you a rundown of the order following all of the pit stop activity. Because of course some cars will have stopped for longer in the pit lane than others, and therefore the order should all be shuffled. Sideways Ferrari, that's Benji Simonson, just getting the tail end of the Ferrari out. The traction kicked in. All of those drivers that have jumped out of the car now looking on. And at the moment, yeah, the front of the queue, Charlotte Gilbert, who is the only car that hasn't pitted. So it will, when we get the race back underway, mean that Sam Neary leads the race, and second will be the McLaren. So it worked out for Paul Bailey coming in. He was running much, much further down through the order in these tricky conditions at the wheel of the McLaren. Pitted that lap earlier, and look what it's done for them. Now that SB Engineering McLaren had to stop for 60 seconds plus an extra 20. And where was it in the race? It was in the teens, wasn't it, overall? Well, it's going to be second in this race, having pitted that lap earlier. Quiet pit lane, pitting right at the front end of the window, just as the safety car was leading them round, and I don't think that McLaren had quite caught the pack, so everyone else trickling around at safety car speed. The McLaren was still playing catch-up to catch the pack, and that's the effect that it has. If you pit at the right time, it just goes to show what an advantage it can give you. And it does now mean that it picks up the lead of Group GTO from that car there, Steve Burgess, who had to stop in the pit lane also for an extra 20 seconds as well. So let's have a quick look as they head over the start-finish line. Let's confirm the running order then. Number 88, Sam Neary leads the race. 28, Ross Wiley in second place, so that's the Group GTO leading car. Third at the moment is another Group GTO car, which is Richard Chamberlain's Porsche. And fourth is going to be number 47, Mike Brown in the Aston Martin. Fifth is now 155. The Ferrari that was in the hands of Lauren Demise has been handed over to Jamie Stanley. Charlotte Gilbert pits this time through. So that will give us the full correct order once she heads back out onto circuit. Sixth place is number 33, Greg Caton. And seventh place is now going to be number 66, which is Marcus Clutton. Eighth is number 4, that's the Nissan of Senna Fielding. Ninth is poor old Steve Burgess now, the Radical tumbling down through the order during that pit stop activity. And completing the top 10 is number 56, which is Benny Simonson. That car, the number 56 Ferrari, has picked up the lead of Group GTC at this stage. So let's pick up on our group leaders. Race leader overall leads Group GT3, second place leads Group GTO. 10th place, car number 56, the Ferrari I mentioned, Benny Simonson, leads Group GTC. Leading Group GTH now is number 44, John Whitehouse, at the wheel of the McLaren, has picked up the lead in Group GTH, but I suspect that might shuffle again by the time they come round next time through. And I think leading Group GTB will still be Nick Phelps, possibly. It depends on where Charlotte Gilbert comes out in the Marcos relative to Nick Phelps. Have to wait and see for the cars further down that have only just pitted, and again for the likes of Group GTB, Group GTH and Group GTA, we can confirm the running order probably on the next lap. So have the conditions improved since the safety car was deployed? I'm not sure they have, even at these reduced speeds. Just look at the amount of spray coming out of the tail end of the cars. So whilst enormously frustrating for the drivers, I'm sure, equally as much enormously frustrating for the officials and ourselves and yourselves as viewers and spectators, that the race is not fully underway. The clock is still ticking, so the race is still happening, but yeah, we're just at this period of time where everybody's just running around behind the safety car and the officials waiting to see whether the conditions can improve. And if anything, I think they've probably got worse since we deployed the safety car. So we'll have to wait and see. The one good thing is, again, as I mentioned earlier on, ever looking for positives out of negatives, we've now largely got the pro drivers behind the wheel. So if we've got the pros, arguably they are better suited to being able to adapt to these difficult conditions. However, I'm afraid to say that is a red flag, and that means that we are going to have to stop the race. So that is an enormous shame that we are potentially going to see the end of this race taking place. Now, we can declare a result at 3/4 distance of a race, which means that if there were 13 3/4 minutes left, and anything less, that would be a result. And the red flags came on with 13 3/4 minutes to go. So I think the officials have decided that the conditions were not going to improve over the remainder of that race, and therefore, whilst it is just me reading into the regulations, but my understanding of the Motorsport UK regulations are we are now at the stage, with the clock being where it is, that can be declared a result, I'm afraid to say. Not what we wanted, but I think that's probably what is likely to happen. So we'll await confirmation of that. You can see all of the cars filing their way down the pit lane, but I think that probably means that, yeah, you could just see, look at the weather now. It is no better than it was when the safety car came out. As I mentioned, if anything, it has deteriorated further, and as we have been very sadly reminded this year, we've got to look after our marshals out there on post, who do a fantastic job for us. Their safety and the competitors' safety is absolutely paramount. There is no moving away from that. Has to be the fundamental focus, and the race officials clearly deciding that the danger, the risk with the amount of water, the amount of cars on track as well, any standing water that's there, that it is just not suitable to go racing in those conditions. And as ever, I would always fully support that decision. They are in race control for a reason, huge amounts of experience there, and they will also be getting radio calls from the various marshals posts around the track that will be indicating as to where standing water is starting to accumulate, and well, clearly the decision has been taken to stop this race, and I can only assume the decision will be taken that will be a result, but say nothing confirmed as yet on the timing screens. Now, our clock is still ticking on the ticker. Right, yeah, we've gone on another screen that I can see to a checkered flag symbol, which suggests that that is going to be it, I'm afraid. So it looks as though the checkered flag is being declared, and therefore, with the weather closing in, we will rattle you through some results of the way that they were standing at the point that the race was brought to a halt. I think the umbrella is probably a bit of a waste of time, to be perfectly honest. There it is, yeah. I think the inevitable was always going to happen. There is a rather second-hand umbrella, but if that's the only casualty from these tricky conditions, then that's not a bad casualty to have, the umbrella, is it? was always going to happen, wasn't it? A brave man for hanging on to it in these conditions, if you ask me. But everybody else, as you can see, is now being ushered out of the pit lane area and in towards the paddock area. So I think we can now perhaps guide you through some results for what was a somewhat abbreviated 22nd round of the championship for the GT Cup Championship here at Snetterton. Sam and Richard Neary claimed the win, if we can say that, from in second place the Group GTO winners Paul Bailey and Ross Wiley. Third was Richard Chamberlain, and it was Matt Manderson and Mike Brown that finished in fourth place. Lauren Demise and Jamie Stanley were fifth, ahead of Seamus Jennings and Greg Caton, Morgan Toolbrook and Marcus Clutton. Graham Tilley and Senham Fielding finished in eighth place. Steve Burgess in ninth place, and Roy Millington and Benny Simonson completed the top 10 but picked up the win in Group GTC. Fraser Smart and James Simons were in 11th place. Warren Gilbert was in 12th place, and in 13th place it was the pairing of Charles Kemp and Stuart Hall. 14th, Ron Johnson and Tingram, that being Tom Ingram. In 15th position it was the Group GTH winning car in the end. Steve Rushton and John Whitehouse coming home in 15th, ahead of Price and McLeod, Holloway and Ellis, Hopton and Carroll, Mason and Lancaster, and Andre Borodin and Ed Peat completed the top 20. In 21st position, Carl Cavers and Lewis Plato. It was the Josh Jackson and Michael O'Brien car that was there in 22nd position, with Mo Ritson and Tom Rawlings in 23rd. The winning Group GTB once more went the way of the number 35 Porsche, Nick Phelps and Dino Zamparelli, ahead of Russ Lindsay and Patrick Collins. Then the Walton and Hart car with Chris Murphy and Michael Coker in 27th, Stevenson and Kellett in 28th, Simon Orange in 29th in the end, and completing the top 20 was car number 118, which was James Townsend, who gave way to Ian Duggan. Charlotte Gilbert was 31st. She was the last of the finishers because we saw the problems that befell John Dillon at the very beginning of the race, and unfortunately the reigning British GT champion Sandy Mitchell was not able to jump on board. So that is it from a very wet and a very, very soggy Snetterton. The weather forecast due to be slightly better for tomorrow, so join us then where we'll have a further sprint race and a further pit stop race to work out who we are going to crown as our GT Cup champion for 2021. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.